Hello, everyone. We'll begin starting the session shortly, but before we begin, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping items. As you know, today's session is being hosted on Zoom, and in the event of any technical issues, we will attempt to restart the session immediately. So if you do lose us, please try rejoining using the same web link. We do have technical support staff in the session today with us working in the background. Before I begin, I want to remind you that this session is being recorded and will be shared online for those not able to attend today. So I'll just give it another minute as we're seeing some people joining, and we'll get started shortly. Okay, I'll get started. Welcome and thank you for joining our information session about the proposed regional transportation service and related alternative approval process. My name is Kevin Lorette. I'm the General Manager of Housing, Planning, and Protective Services with the Capital Regional District. Next slide. I would like to first start with a territorial acknowledgement. The CRD conducts its business within the territories of many First Nations, including but not limited to Paquachin, Malahat, Pachidat, Penelakut, Beecher Bay, Songhees, Sauk, Sartlip, Sakum, and Kosapsum, all of whom have a long-standing relationship with the land and waters from time immemorial that continues to this day. Just starting with the agenda, I would like to first introduce staff that are joining us today. Kristen Morley is our General Manager of Corporate Services, responsible for coordinating legislative services, including the alternative approval process. Kristen will be presenting information on the alternative approval process later in the presentation. Next, I'll introduce Patrick Klassen. Patrick is our Senior Manager of Regional Planning, and he'll be presenting on the proposed regional transportation service. In addition, we have Jay Doulard, who is our Senior Transportation Planner, and Jay will be available for questions along with Kristen and Patrick at the end of the presentation. We also have additional staff supporting us today, taking your questions and moderating the event. For today's agenda, we'll start by providing an overview of the Capital Regional District before discussing the region's current transportation challenges. We'll then present information about the proposed regional transportation service, including estimated costs and the related alternative approval process, launching on April 3rd. We'll have some time for questions at the end of the presentation. If you have a question for the panelists, please use the question function at the bottom of the screen. We'll be answering some questions directly through the Q&A function, while some will be read and answered live. We will only be addressing questions and not reading out statements. Please also be mindful of the number of people we have attending today, and that if we can't answer all questions, we will look to update our frequently asked questions document and post it online shortly following this session. So with that, we'll get right into the presentation. The Capital Regional District, also known as the CRD, is the regional government for 13 municipalities and 3 electoral areas on southern Vancouver Island and related Gulf Islands. The CRD is governed by a 24-member board of directors. The CRD board is composed of 1 or more elected officials from each of the local governments and 3 electoral areas within the CRD boundaries. The Capital Region, which is shown on white on the map, it's a diverse and growing region, home to approximately 460,000 people, and that's projected to grow to over 600,000 by the year 2050. Our region is also geographically diverse. In addition to our urban areas, it also includes significant portions of agriculture and rural land, as well as several Gulf Islands. Although residents may live in one municipality, many travel across the region as part of their daily lives. In total, the CRD spans 237,000 hectares. There are various bodies and agencies with authority and responsibility stretching across the region. These include federal, provincial, and regional government, First Nation governments, local governments, and several different commissions, such as the Agriculture Land Commission. A regional district is a form of local government that provides regional services to communities within a defined area. Regional districts can also serve as the local government for unincorporated areas, which for the capital region includes Salt Spring Island, Southern Gulf Islands, and the Juan de Fuca electoral areas. Regional districts were created to improve cooperation between municipalities and rural areas, and a regional district can take actions that the Board of Directors deems necessary or beneficial for a community. The CRD has a diverse range of services, such as water, solid waste and recycling, regional planning, regional parks, and housing. That's just to name a few of the larger regional services. Regional districts establish and provide services based on what communities and municipalities ask for and need. As the region grows and the needs evolve, additional services may be required. New services at the CRD are established with direction from the CRD board, which, as mentioned, is comprised of local elected representatives. To establish a new service, the CRD board must describe a proposed service in a bylaw and obtain elector approval prior to adopting the bylaw. Bylaws describe the service, define the service boundaries, identify the participants, and include the method of cost recovery. We will provide more information on the alternative approval process for the proposed transportation service later in this session. And now I'll turn it over to Patrick, who will provide an overview of our region's transportation and explain why it is a CRD board priority.
Thank you, Kevin, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. In 2023, the CRD board identified transportation as one of their strategic priorities for their board term, in addition to housing, climate action and environment, First Nations, and governance. Following this, the CRD board directed staff to investigate transportation governance and implementation options. Transportation is a critical issue in our region, impacting the daily life and long-term sustainability. With a growing population, our current transportation system is challenged to meet the needs of our communities. Many residents already face long-term and costly commutes. Adding more roads isn't always an option due to the region's geographic constraints. That's why we need to use our existing road capacity efficiently, ensuring the needs of those who need it most. Transportation is also the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the region, with on-road transportation responsible for almost 40% of greenhouse gases emitted in the region annually. With a declaration of climate emergency, the region needs to sustainably reduce our climate emissions. Currently, the CRD has a limited role in transportation, focusing on planning, support, and managing the regional trail network, primarily as a recreational system. Without a clear mandate, these responsibilities are split between regional planning and regional parks. Overall, the CRD has limited ability to address critical transportation challenges. This chart illustrates how transportation is currently governed in the Capital Regional District. Local governments, the CRD, BC Transit, and the Ministry of Transportation each play a distinct role in planning, developing, operating, and maintaining transportation infrastructure. Additionally, the Airport Authority and BC Ferries also have responsibilities in the region. Although there are a range of bodies in the region, no single agency is responsible for coordinating these efforts or ensuring a seamless multimodal transportation system that connects all of these different ways of traveling around the region. For example, the CRD is responsible for the management and operation of the regional trails, whereas local governments are responsible for regional and local roads and land use, and the Ministry of Transportation and Transit is responsible for highways. As a result, while each organization is making progress on its own priorities, there are significant gaps in how responsibilities align and integrate with one another. The proposed regional transportation service creates an opportunity for greater collaboration in all of these areas. It enables the CRD to better support local governments, BC Transit, and the Ministry of Transportation and Transit in working together towards a more connected and efficient regional transportation system. In July of last year, to help address our region's transportation challenges, the CRD board unanimously directed staff to draft a regional transportation service establishment bylaw. A draft bylaw was then presented to the board in September of 2024, and staff were directed to proceed with the next steps. So that bylaw, which is bylaw number 4630, would establish a new regional transportation service to address evolving transportation needs within the Capital Regional District. This bylaw has been drafted to provide flexibility, allowing for the development of new transportation programs and functions that align with regional priorities. The service would grow gradually, beginning with the consolidation of existing transportation functions in initial years. If established, this service could lead to several key outcomes, including the creation of a unified regional transportation vision for our region, the strengthening of our collective regional voice on transportation matters, the development of new regional transportation programs, and the expansion and enhancement of our regional trail system. I will now take a bit of a moment to elaborate on each of these 4 areas. So one of the first priorities of the new service would be to develop a new regional transportation plan within the first 2 years. The plan would establish a long-term vision for the region's transportation future, shaped by community input and the work of local governments and agencies to ensure it reflects the needs and aspirations of residents. As most travel in our region crosses local government boundaries, the service would also work towards integrating land use and transportation to reflect the interconnected nature of our communities. This would make it easier for residents to access their jobs and education and for other opportunities. The regional transportation service would also unify our regional voice on transportation. It'll do this by fostering stronger cooperation across municipalities and increasing capacity to address transportation challenges. A strong unified approach would also strengthen our case for federal and provincial transportation investment. And this could open the door to significant funding opportunities, including the Canada Public Transit Fund, which is a new fund, and it's the largest public transit investment in Canadian history, starting in 2026-2027. The objective of the service in this regard is to position the region to take full advantage of these opportunities and build for the long term. This service would also offer new or expanded programs and policies and projects to better serve the region. So some examples of tangible projects could include sustainable commute programs to promote active travel options, enhanced transportation data and analysis to improve planning and decision-making by all agencies, and coordinating regional policies on things like traffic safety, regional car sharing, and the regulation of new modes of travel like e-bikes and e-scooters. Additionally, and perhaps more importantly, the service could provide support for key local initiatives and projects through grant funding opportunities and by sharing professional capacity and expertise. And this could include municipal transportation projects. Our regional trails are a beloved and well-used community asset, with on average over 3.8 million visits annually. By expanding and enhancing regional trails, the service would aim to improve access and safety for all travel users. Currently, the service is proposed to include the Galloping Goose, Lochside, and ENN regional trails. With the new service, the CRD would work with residents and local governments on the management and planning of regional trails with a transportation perspective, ensuring they continue to serve as vital, well-maintained connections as the region continues to grow. The CRD is already making significant investments in regional trails through a project called the Regional Trestle Renewal Trail Widening and Lighting Project. This initiative will improve, widen, and upgrade 6.5 kilometers of the Galloping Goose and Lochside trails, enhancing safety and accessibility for all users. If the service is established, the new regional transportation service would support this project. This approach would integrate trails into strategic transportation planning to enhance connectivity between the regional trails and the broader transportation network. It would also improve the accessibility, ensuring that as many people as possible can easily access and use these trails. The next section of this presentation will provide an overview of estimated costs. So the service would begin by transferring and integrating existing transportation functions currently managed by two CRD departments, including regional parks and regional planning. Currently, the CRD transportation budget for these functions is approximately $4.7 million annually, which includes the operational budget for our regional trails. So this means the upkeep, maintenance, and safety of our regional trails. As mentioned, this service would also support the existing regional trestles renewal, trail widening, and lighting project. The CRD has already committed up to $5.6 million annually to support borrowing costs for this major trail project. The total costs for the region, however, will depend on a number of grants that have been applied for. These are existing and already considered costs. So financially, from the 4.7 million current transportation budget, the service will go gradually and responsibly as this bar chart indicates. This chart shows the existing transportation costs that will be consolidated into the service and the estimated new costs, which are subject to future refinement and CRD board approval. In 2025, there will be no change in the cost for the new service. The cost would remain $4.7 million. To allow for the growth of the service and increase in transportation functions, these operational costs are estimated to grow to $5.4 million in 2026. And following this, we estimate that between 2027 and 2029, operational costs would increase by approximately 1.9% each year. This table provides a breakdown of projected costs over the first 4 years of the service. The first row includes the estimated CRD service costs that would be transferred to the regional transportation service. The second row shows the estimated new service costs, which is subject to CRD board approval. These two rows have been combined to show the total service costs in the highlighted third row, which was also what was shown previously on the bar chart. The committed borrowing costs associated with the regional trestles renewal, trail widening, and lighting project are highlighted in yellow on the table. This cost could be reduced if we are successful in our grant applications from senior levels of government. The bottom row, titled Total, is the sum of the total service costs plus the already approved borrowing for the regional trestle renewal, trail widening, and lighting projects. If the regional transportation service is established, further financial forecasting will be undertaken for future years. To provide long-term flexibility for our region, the maximum amount that can be requisitioned annually for this service is up to $20 million. This is the capacity for the long-term future of the service. It is not what is being proposed as the budget for the service. For clarity, approximately 50% of this maximum amount is reflected on the bottom row of the table. The remaining requisition amount is for long-term service growth at the discretion of the CRD board. There are currently no plans to reach the proposed maximum requisition. So to reiterate, any new costs related to the service would go through the CRD's annual planning process and must be approved by the CRD board as part of the CRD financial plan bylaw. This is a complex process and it's reflective of a lot of work. Before the board makes any final decisions, the CRD is proceeding with a required electoral consent process to seek public opinion. Kirsten will provide some details on that, but first, some context on the timeline to date. This timeline presents an overview of the Regional Transportation Service establishment process and shows where we are today, in addition to the anticipated timing of the alternative approvals process. As mentioned, transportation has long been a priority of our local municipalities and has been reflected as such at the CRD. In 2023, the CRD board identified transportation as one of their strategic priorities for the board term. This provided staff with direction. Through 2023 and 2024, the CRD engaged with regional partners we work with on transportation governance. This includes a regional transportation workshop that brought together politicians and staff representatives from local governments, electoral areas, and First Nations. On September 11th of 2024, first, second, and third reading of the draft bylaw 4630 was approved by the CRD. And the board directed staff to move forward with an alternative approvals process. In February of this year, 2025, the bylaw received approval from the Inspector of Municipalities. That is a branch within the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. On April 3rd of 2025, the AAP response period will begin, and on May 16th of 2025, the AAP response period will end. In June of 2025, the alternative approvals process results will be delivered, and final consideration of the bylaw will be made by the board. I will now pass this over to Kristen Morley to provide an overview of the alternative approvals process.
Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon, everybody. As Kevin mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the CRD is governed by a 24-member board of elected officials. Some are appointed from local councils from the 13 municipalities in the CRD, and the others are directly elected, like our 3 electoral area directors. Municipalities and regional districts must obtain consent or approval of the electors before a municipal council or regional district board can proceed with certain matters. That includes creating a new service or undertaking new borrowing for major projects. Where approval of the electors is required under legislation, it can be obtained by a local government in one of 3 different ways. We can seek consent of municipal councils within the CRD. Under this method, the municipal council will consent or not on behalf of the residents within their region. The next method is we can conduct assent voting or a referendum. And that's where we hold a vote. And if more electors vote in favor than against, then consent is achieved. The third method, and the method that we've chosen for this process, or rather I should say the board has chosen, is that we can hold an alternative approval process or an AAP. The alternative approval process allows electors in the participating area to indicate whether they're against a local government proposed bylaw moving forward. So electors can voice their opposition by submitting a completed elector response form to the CRD. And if 10% of eligible electors voice their opposition by submitting a completed elector response form, then the AAP has failed. What that means then is the board has a choice. It can simply choose not to proceed with the initiative, or it can instead decide that it would like to run a referendum and then see if it can obtain consent of the electors through a referendum instead. Next slide. So why use an AAP? Well, an AAP, first of all, is one of the 3 required processes that we can use to get elector consent. The benefits of an AAP is that it's cost effective and it's efficient, and it's a very useful way to gauge public opinion on these important issues that require consent. It gives electors the most flexibility, I would say, to participate by submitting a completed elector response form over a period of at least 30 days. Forms can be accessed online and they can be submitted electronically. This process also ensures that significant decisions reflect the community's wishes while saving resources. It does allow direct participation by electors in a way that other methods, such as getting municipal council consent, does not allow for. A successful AAP is a necessary step, I would say, in service establishment. but it's not sufficient in and of itself to create the service. So it's important to keep in mind that if the AUP is successful, the CRD will still need to adopt the bylaw to create the service. Next slide, please. In terms of how to participate, the alternative approval process response period for the regional transportation service opens on April 3rd, and it closes at 4:30 p.m. on May 16th. If you support the proposed bylaw, then no action is required. If you're opposed to the bylaw, you can fill out an elector response form and submit it to the CRD by the deadline. And all of the information you can find on the CRD website. And with that, I will conclude my portion of the presentation and hand it back to Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. We'll now have some time for questions, which I will direct to the CRD team for their response. We have hopefully answered some of your questions throughout this presentation, but if there is something else that you would like more information on, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and type the question there. As mentioned, please appreciate that there's a high number of people on this webinar today. If we cannot answer all the questions in this session, we will look to review and update our frequently asked questions, and those will be posted on the webinar shortly after the session. Before we get started on the questions that we're receiving today, we did receive several questions regarding transportation initiatives in advance of the session today, and we'll address those before turning to the QA function for further questions. So I'll start with the first one we received. Will the service address local infrastructure needs such as crosswalks, pothole repairs, or highway expansions? I'll turn that over to you, Patrick.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, this is a helpful question, I think, to help clarify the CRD responsibilities. So local streets are the responsibility and will remain this responsibility of local governments. Similarly, highways are the responsibility of the Ministry of Transportation and Transit. So this service doesn't propose a change to those types of responsibilities. However, it does allow us to work with those agencies and those governments for greater collaboration, and allows the CRT to better identify community need and attract more funding to the region. So I think we mentioned in the presentation, the first objective of this service will be to develop a new regional transportation plan. This plan will identify regional transportation priorities, which may include a number of infrastructure projects. We would then advocate strongly for these priorities, seek and support funding from the province and federal governments, and the service would also we'd also be enabled to explore cost-sharing opportunities through grant funding with municipalities on regional priorities that are identified in the plan.
Thank you, Patrick. And then second question, what are the most effective strategies for addressing the region's transportation challenges?
Yeah, that is a good question and a very difficult one. There's no single answer, I don't think, to that question. We stated in this presentation, according to our forecasting, that the region is going to grow to over 600,000 people by 2050. So, you know, we need to better integrate between land use planning and transportation. We have 13 municipalities, each making their own land use decisions. And those broad decisions provide direction, and those decisions and directions are brought together into our regional growth strategy. And that advocates for a more compact and sustainable region. So the regional transportation would aim to do the same for transportation with a new regional transportation plan, working in a similar manner as the regional growth strategy and linking to the regional growth strategy. So it's really important for us to always remember, you know, that the CRD is intermunicipal, and therefore our regional transportation plan really needs to take that lens and plan with the region in mind.
And then the final question before we get to the live questions, how do we get more people to take the bus rather than driving a private car alone? Over to you, Patrick.
These are tricky questions. Yeah, so first of all, BC Transit provides bus service in the region. So when we talk about a regional transportation service, we're not talking about bus service. That said, there does need to be more collaboration between BC Transit and the region and local municipalities. I mean, there is collaboration today, but we can and need to do more. And our transit routes should be as simple and as attractive as possible to encourage people to take the bus. Transit needs to be competitive with the car, like realistically, to encourage people to travel by bus over the car. So there are certainly opportunities to explore this topic in more detail when we update and engage on the regional transportation plan. But one good example of what we can do is to improve our walking routes and our cycling routes and our multi-use pathways that connect to buses. We can also explore, for example, better bicycle and car park and ride opportunities with adjacency to bus routes. But perhaps the best opportunity we have is in planning for more transit and getting more people on buses is the advocacy to senior levels of government for more infrastructure planning. So I can't underscore how important that is. So if we take Metro Vancouver, for example, they have just received $1.58 billion in funding. That's in addition to the $9 billion in capital funding they've received already for the Broadway subway extension and the Surrey Langley SkyTrain extension. So combined, they have received over $10 billion in funding from senior levels of government. So that regional transportation planning and advocacy at a regional level, coordinated, can result in very, very tangible outcomes.
Thanks for that. We have got a lot of questions coming in through the Q&A, which is good to see. I'll start with the first one. On the transportation responsibility slide, and that's the slide where we had the different agencies and the functions of transportation. It said regional and local roads were the responsibility of local governments. Can you give an example of what a regional road is? And there's a couple parts to this, so I'll pause there.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's in reference to sort of like the arterial types of roads that are not highways, but they span multiple jurisdictions. So you can think of like Shelburne or Mackenzie. Those are municipal. Shelburne, Transects 2, 3 municipalities. So think of arterial and collector roads within our region.
Right, and then on the same slide, the CRD is currently only responsible for trails. In the creation of this new regional transportation, will the CRD assume responsibility of all regional and local roads? And I know, Patrick, you responded that the roads and the regional and local roads do remain the responsibility of the municipality. So I'll move on to the next one. If not, what is the tangible outcome of the $20 million in new taxes?
Right, yeah. So, well, first of all, we're not taxing anybody $20 million here. Maximum requisition is capacity. The bylaw is about capacity and setting up for a long-term future. We're not proposing with this bylaw to change this year any adjustments to the current requisition. We're about consolidating existing services into a service that can better coordinate together with our municipal partners and other agencies. Future requisition is entirely incumbent upon making a value proposition to elected officials on the board and running through a budgetary process for their approval. So that's a really important point. The difference between a service bylaw and what a maximum requisition is. So we've gone through in the presentation some of the tangible examples of some of the potential opportunities, whether it be I'll give another example. I don't think it was brought up in the process, but the data and analysis. So we're scoping to potentially update our modeling. So this is a very comprehensive and detailed process where you model traffic along the region. Nobody does that, but that allows nobody does that other than the CRD. And so we're looking to enhance our data services supply the ministry and BC Transit and local governments with much more comprehensive analysis and data. We don't do comprehensive data analysis today, so that will help make decisions in the future, in addition to the other examples I've already provided today.
Thanks, Patrick. And I will add just a point to the you raised a good point that it's a consolidation of services as the first step, and in that operations budget of approximately 5 million you indicated that currently exists today, and under a new regional transportation, when we're requisitioning under that new service for the 5 million, there will be an offset in the two existing regional services that we currently have under regional parks and regional planning to bring down the requisition to reflect the increase in the regional transportation service. So there will be there's not going to be an increase of 5 million on top of what currently exists. It already does exist. Just want to clarify that point.
Yeah, and if I may, Kevin, I'll just jump in as well. Another important, because we're talking about costs here, a real important point to make is that any future borrowing of money for a major capital project, like what's already been approved, the trail widening project, like future projects like that, future borrowing like that, has to go back through to an external public process, through something like an AAP. Or a referendum, or whatever tool the board decides to use. So again, the capacity of a maximum requisition does not mean that a service can borrow money in that regard.
Thank you, Patrick. I'll move to the next question. How will this new planning process integrate with local government planning? I'm concerned that Saanich, for instance, is not positioned to include regional planning priorities, and would you like to explain exactly how the CRD will insert itself into the Saanich CCV planning process?
I'm not sure what the Saanich CCV planning process is in direct reference to, but what I can say is that we do work today with all of our municipal partners, obviously, but what we want to do is what we've talked about in this presentation is to do a comprehensive regional planning process like the regional growth strategy for transportation, and that is the new regional transportation plan. That process would be a very comprehensive process. It would take at least 2 years for us to undertake. It would be evidence-based. So we would do a number of background studies regionally, working with our local partners and our regional agencies to really create that long-term vision of the future. The type of vision that we can then go and advocate for funding and support for, and that would include projects across the region that would touch on the lives of all residents in the region. So, so Saanich obviously does a lot of planning, a lot of work relative to their municipal boundaries, and a lot of their work would be woven into and incorporated into the regional transportation plan, as well as that of all the other municipalities, to create that really cohesive, clear regional picture.
Thanks for that, Patrick. Next question. What is the cost of improving 6.5 kilometers of trail on the Galloping Goose? I think there's 100 kilometers of regional trails. Does this mean that the cost to do all the trails is 15 times the cost of the widening and lighting project? And so, I mean, I can speak specifically to that. The cost that we have for that trail widening and lighting project is projected at $53 million. We have, as a regional district, has applied for active transportation grants for that work. And what we've indicated was the support to that project that we could provide was indicated in that separate line item of providing support, which was the borrowing associated with that project. Did you want to add anything further to that, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that so the project includes some very, very significant infrastructure pieces, like the Selkirk Trestle is one of the busiest active transportation routes or bridges or trestles, I suppose, on one of the busiest active transportation routes in British Columbia. I would say probably up there in North America. This is where we get, between 3 and 4, pushing 4 million visits or trips a year. A lot of the infrastructure investment is going into those types of pieces. So the Selkirk Trestle, and this will extend its life for a significant amount of time. So a lion's share, I would say, is about infrastructure investment here. The trail widening project is warranted because the traffic in that area on that 6.5 kilometers, it's overwhelming. The trail in this section is sort of 3 to 4 meters wide, and this will separate uses so that pedestrians, people with strollers or in wheelchairs don't have to compete for space with bicycles, so they'll be fully separated, and it'll be lit. So it will significantly improve a route which is exceptionally busy.
Thank you. There's a question specific to the costs in the table. Are these costs real, inflation adjusted costs, or nominal dollar costs?
Right. So the 4.7 is an estimate of real costs now, but obviously it's projected out at its current state, so that's a nominal cost. The other costs, which are the projections, are real costs. So they are anticipating growth, but of course, that's just based on what our knowledge is today. When we establish more detailed financial analysis, subject, of course, to the approval, if it's approved, we would create a budget that would be much more detailed.
Thank you for that. Another question on the costs. It says in the projected costs after 5 years, you will have taxed more than 25 million. Can you confirm the tangible output is planning, coordination, and single vision? There's an additional separate line item for trail widening, which looks like another 10 million plus. So in that table where we talk about those projected costs after 5 years, we do have an existing cost for operation and maintenance of the regional trails and for the regional planning work that we currently do. That is the 4.7 million or approximately 5 million operation and maintenance. And there's a little bit of growth in that over the 5 years. And so that currently exists in the two functions. That is not new. Those costs exist. It is the separate line item on the incremental as we go through the regional transportation plan update in the first couple of years and start to identify priority projects and start to implement some programming. We do see that slight growth over that 5-year period or 4-year period. I believe the total increase was going from 4.7 to 5.7. So there was a $1 million increase in those operation and maintenance costs. And then it speaks to the trail widening and lightening, which is indicated as another 10+ million. And no, that's not the case. What it shows is the amount to support that the borrowing for that $53 million project over that period can grow to approximately another 5 million, and the total then came to 10 million. And so that project exists, and the borrowing has been approved, and so that is coming under this new service, but it's not introducing something new that the board has not already approved. Anything you want to add further to that, Patrick?
No, I think that's great.
Besides the trail widening and lighting project and the integration of the trails with roads, if this approval project goes through, can you please give specific examples of items being considered that will help with this initiative?
Sure, yeah. So, well, first and foremost, we spoke about the regional transportation plan. So the regional transportation plan is the first step for a very good reason. It is going to be the roadmap for the region and for the service. It will map out the priorities of residents, of community groups, of local governments, and those priorities will dictate what we're going to do. But some examples, I think in the presentation we talked about some examples of really practical things. So there's the sustainable commute programs. We already do a school trip planning program. We would expand that and perhaps also explore expanding that into major employer institutional commute services. So that's activities to promote active travel, active transportation. The modeling I spoke to as well, some may find that boring, some may find that interesting. It's incredibly important to model what the future looks like. And if you don't do that work, you can't make evidence-based decisions. So that's a really good example. Data collection, analysis. There's also, of course, and this is subject to CRD board approval, of course, but the idea of through the regional transportation plan, establishing a grant funding opportunity. So this can be funds that would be used to support identified significant projects regionally. So maybe it's Saanich that has a very significant project that might support increased bus service or enhanced bus service, or maybe it's Souk that has a connector trail that they want to connect to the Galloping Goose, or perhaps it's Esquimalt that has a traffic safety project that they want to undertake. So not only can the CRD provide support to capacity of technical expertise, support for grant funding and advocacy, but we would then also have the opportunity to help cost share on that significant project because that project would benefit a lot more than just the residents of those municipalities. So, but excuse me, it really is the first step, the regional transportation plan. We want to make sure the priorities and programs that we offer through this service are really tangible, that are value added. That's why we're not projecting a lot of growth. We want to take the time to really create that cohesive roadmap, and then we would approach the board if it was deemed valuable to make a case for those programs and functions drawn from the regional transportation plan.
Thanks, Patrick. We do have a couple questions on the alternative approval process. So over to you, Kristen. Of the 3 approval processes presented, what are the typical types of decisions for each? I was surprised to see alternative approval process used for new services. How often does this happen at the CRD?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. There's different kinds of services that CRD can establish, and some of them are regional, and that means that they include all of the municipalities in CRD plus all of the electoral areas. Sometimes we have sub-regional services, so they may include only 1 or 2 different municipalities, or we can even have really local services that are just one municipality or even just a portion of one of our electoral areas for very small services. So, I would say in terms of the kinds of approval processes we use, it often correlates to the kind of service that we're creating. So, for example, with a regional service, where it really requires participation of all of the participants, so that would be all the municipalities plus the electoral areas to be effective. And transportation certainly falls into that category because you don't want to have a patchwork approach. You would really want all of the municipalities to be part of that service so they can contribute to having that continuity. We would choose a regional approval process, so something like either a referendum or an AAP. In terms of how often, let's see, how often this happens. I would say that it really depends on what initiatives we have going forward. Certainly when we're doing borrowing, for example, for existing services, we need to go through an elector approval process for that. Frequently we do that by way of AAP. It really depends on what kind of initiatives we have. We have had 2 other AAPs that we've just conducted this year for a food land service and a biodiversity service. And we do have another one that's going forward quite shortly. So I would say that this is a tool that we use fairly frequently for approval of either new services or for borrowing.
Thanks. The next question, again, AAP. The AAP process has been undertaken by Esquimalt and Souk and has been widely criticized Why was this process chosen instead of a referendum?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. In terms of the AAP, certainly I'm aware of some of the criticism that comes from the public around AAPs, and I appreciate the fact that there is a feeling sometimes that because it's a counter petition process, that means you have to register dissent. Some people feel less comfortable with that than something like a referendum where it's where the results are there more in favor than opposed. But there is a major benefit to an AAP over referendums, and that is specific to CRD, given that we're a regional government. Referendums are very expensive to conduct. They have all the requirements of, almost all the requirements of an election, which for the CRD means that we are dealing with a very broad region. We are dealing with, the three electoral areas, so the Southern Gulf Islands and Salt Spring Island, all the way up to Port Renfrew, all the municipalities together. A referendum would require us to have voting and polling stations in every single one of those jurisdictions. It would require extensive communication efforts. The cost would probably exceed about $500,000 to run a referendum. An AAP, by contrast, I would say costs us somewhere around $15,000 to run. So there's certainly a fairly big contrast between the costs of the two processes. We also find too that referendums have the benefit of being somewhat more accessible, or an AAP has a benefit of being more accessible in the sense that there's not one set assigned voting day. It is more flexibility, I would say, for electors to be able to submit an elector response form. They can do it online. You can download a form from your computer. You can talk to staff. You can get assistance in filling it out if you need to. So I would say primarily the difference between the two is cost, given the size of the CRD, and accessibility. I would also mention too, though, that if the AAP does fail and it's not successful, there is still the option to proceed with a referendum instead. So the CRD board could then choose to take that next step. So one way to look at AAPs is it's a way to really test the waters and gauge how much opposition there is to a particular initiative. And then the CRD board would still have the option of choosing to do a referendum if they felt like there was a very high level of opposition to a particular service or initiative.
Thanks, Kristen. There is a follow-on that. What is the plan to ensure the public as a whole is aware of the requirement to show dissent?
Yeah, so we do have a communications plan, and that is approved by the CRD board at the time we go forward with what we call the AAP requirements. So, the report that outlines how the AAP is going to be carried out and what that elector response form looks like. So in addition to this information session, we will have a number of publications and advertisements going in the Times Colonist and the Black Press publications, as well as distributed throughout the islands. Salt Spring Island Driftwood newspaper, for example, we're going to have online advertisements on certain online publications like the Salt Spring Exchange. We do have a subscriber page on the CRD website, so we've emailed notice to all of the subscribers on our Get Involved CRD service. We will have media releases. We have extended the timeline as well. So under the legislation, we're required to have 30 days for a response period. However, we have provided additional time just to make sure that there's more time for electors to get the message and hopefully learn about the service and decide whether or not they want to send in a response form.
Thank you for that, Kristen. We do have a project-specific question on the Selkirk Trestle upgrade, and a question related to, can you say what is being done to resurface the trestle as part of that? It's difficult for wheelchairs and those with mobility issues on or off bikes because of the roughness and the length of the trestle. Patrick?
Sure, yeah, this one hits close to home. It's not just difficult for people with mobility challenges, it's difficult for everybody. Jay, who is on the call here today on our team, rode his bike across the Selkirk Trestle, slipped and broke his collarbone recently. So we're keenly aware of the condition of the Selkirk Trestle and the number of people that cross it, like thousands and thousands of people, the school kids, everybody who crosses it daily. It definitely needs a new surface. So that is part of the scope of that project. That will be included, a new surface treatment on top of it. At the moment, the trestle, if you've gone on it recently, there's work underway now to improve and lengthen the stability and life of the supports. I don't, off the top of my mind, recall the exact treatment, but it certainly will be a smoother surface, one that is slip resistant, and one that is very cognizant of the wheels and the feet going across it.
Thank you, Patrick. Question related to governance and service offering. Is this regional service similar to TransLink or Metrolinx? Turn it to you, Patrick.
Sure, yeah, happy to reply to that. So no, those are both authorities. So there's a big difference between a service and authority. We are proposing a service, which is a function of a local government. An authority like TransLink, that is a provincial entity. It's a whole new crown, effectively like BC Ferries. It's a crown corporation, effectively, and that does a number of functions that also include the operation of the service. So running the trains and buses. So that service is currently provided by BC Transit. They actually have over 60 transit services across British Columbia. So what we're talking about today is much smaller scale and scope and budget to something like that. It's much more about the planning, advocacy, and coordination and program delivery, policy program delivery. So it's kind of apples to oranges, I would say.
Thank you, Patrick. And then we have a question. Aren't trails within the jurisdiction of CRD parks? This seems to make sense to me. Why remove it from there?
Yeah, currently they are. The parks operates, maintains, and manages the 3 regional trails we talked to, as well as a whole bunch of other trails on the Gulf Islands, within our parks. So they have a big portfolio there. They manage all of those through an integrated service delivery system with a sort of a recreational priority to their service delivery. So what's occurring here and what the board has directed us to do is to take those 3 trails, the 3 regional trails, and to plan, manage, and operate them as a transportation primary. Given the traffic and the number of people commuting on them, to integrate them into our regional transportation network, just to look at and improve how people are commuting and to have that approach to it. All the other trails that Parks currently maintains for recreation primary operations will continue to do so. And I should say, like, there's nothing stopping the board from considering in the future other trails to consider for regional transportation perspectives. But that really needs to be a warranted approach. Like, it needs to be that the traffic on them is really a commuting type of traffic primarily. And that's what we're seeing now. And that's why, for example, the trail widening process, the trestle renewals is taking place. It's because that is reached capacity. Just like when any major road or highway reaches capacity, like we're seeing across the region and across the province, you get those major improvement projects taking place.
Thanks for that, Patrick. Another question. Souk is geographically unique, given that we have one main road in and out. Any road work results in extraordinary delays. Public transit is sorely lacking. How can Souk benefit from this model? Patrick.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a super great question. The Souk, Port Renfrew, electoral areas, there's a lot of areas in the more peripheral, I would say. So firstly, just to reiterate from before, like, the cost for this service will not be increased unless there's a clear benefit to the region. So first of all, like, what we're talking about is consolidating existing functions, pulling them together, having a transportation lens and focus on them, and then, you know, undertaking that regional transportation plan that will include the electoral areas. It will include Souk. It will include the Gulf Islands and Salt Spring, to look at what benefits can the service deliver. And there's not going to be new costs first. So there's, sorry, with regards to new programming and new services like that. So that's what the process of doing the plan is for. And even so, the plan is to grow gradually over several years. I don't want to repeat myself too many times. I think we went through a number of the potential programs and you know, possible functions. But to add to those that I've said already, I think it's important to note that places on the periphery, like Souk perhaps, but perhaps even more so like the electoral areas, they don't have a lot of resources or capacity, to undertake major projects or plans. So whether it's us helping provide additional capacity, or delivering school travel programs, or providing them with the data and analysis they need to make their own decisions, or supporting them through regional cost sharing or granting programs, or to make a strong case for Souk to get more funding for Highway 14 and to show it by way of traffic modeling what it's going to be like in 20 years through data and analysis, to make a case for them to get more investment from the province or the feds for that highway. Like, those are the type of really tangible things that we can do with the service.
Thanks for that. And I will add, a lot of people that reside in Souk do travel across the region for work and play, and that there will be a benefit as they cross municipal boundaries in their commuting. Is advocating for supporting light rail transit in the scope of this project? Patrick, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, that's a cool question. I would say that if it's what the region wants to see, if it's what our politicians and through the regional transportation plan, what we want to see, which I'm going to guess, and I don't like guessing. I'm going to guess that they're going to want to see it. If they do, then yeah, absolutely. The regional transportation plan, if it's aligned, will support higher order transit. I don't know if that means light rail per se, but higher order transit is needed. We've just BC Transit has just successfully launched, well, a couple years ago, the rapid bus service, the Blink, and they're working to expand rapid bus service. But the region needs more. If we're going to get to 600,000 people, we need to start thinking about a real long-term cohesive transportation vision. Metro Vancouver established a livable region strategic planning years ago in the 80s. Could have even been the 70s. I know it was in the 80s. And that had the vision that is being implemented and has been implemented over the last number of decades. That's the vision to connect all of the municipalities together with higher order transit, which now you see as SkyTrain. That vision is what has resulted in such a significant investment of capital from the federal government and the provincial government, because we're never going to get higher order transit here without that support, without that advocacy. And you can never do the advocacy without having the vision. So it's a big part of why this service is so important.
Thanks for that. Another question, is there any discussions on the integration of the ENN rail line to turn it into an active transportation corridor? Some is alongside it, but what about the whole corridor? It appears that rapid bus lanes are the choice in terms of moving to electric buses while allowing for rapid and frequent service. Do you want to start with the ENN component, Patrick?
Yeah, sure. And I think they're kind of interrelated. Sort of the ENN, some of it already is the ENN rail trail. Portions of it through View Royal and Esquimalt, and portions in Langford. We already have a plan to extend the ENN over time, rail trail that is, out to West Hills. So that is already within the sort of the long-term plan. But there are portions of the ENN sort of, is it 6 Mile west, that is a functional rail corridor right now. So I can say, like, we are actively working with the Island Corridor Foundation, which is sort of the owner and the interjurisdictional sort of authority over the corridor. We're actively working with them to explore the long-term future of that corridor, what it can serve both interregional, i.e. up to CVRD in the Cowichan Valley, but also here for within CRD purposes. So that's certainly something that's being considered, and that is something that will also weave its way into the process to develop a long-term plan and vision for the region.
Thank you for that. There's another question. I heard a comment about CRD cost sharing with municipalities on projects. Aren't the taxpayers the same? So are we cost sharing when it's the same person paying the tax bill? How is a regional transportation service more efficient having 2 cooks in the kitchen than having 1 cook? The municipality manage and procure transportation initiatives.
Yes,
Now,
taxpayers are ultimately fund public services. But a regional grant matching program helps distribute costs more effectively and unlocks funding opportunities that municipalities may not be able to access alone. So many grants, including provincial and federal ones, require a matching component. And by pooling regional resources, municipalities can access larger grants that may otherwise be out of reach, particularly if we're talking about smaller municipalities. So some municipalities also have different fiscal capacities, right? So a regional program can ensure that smaller communities benefit from investment without bearing an overwhelming burden on their local residents. And of course, like, there's the economies of scale. So coordinating efforts at a regional scale can also help reduce duplication and the administrative work. So there are absolutely tangible benefits to a regional grant matching program. And that is why it is a very effective tool that is used by many regional districts and other similar authorities across North America.
thanks, Patrick, for that explanation. Would this proposed regional transportation service support solutions like LRT compared to the current model? I believe that one is being answered, but
yeah, I see Jay is typing an answer, and you know what? Jay is the most appropriate person to answer this, because honestly, if you're going to compare different types of service, you need a data, you need to model, you need to do scenario testing. You absolutely have to have a regional traffic model and read regional data analysis. Otherwise, it's impossible to scenario test. So if we want to move as a region past status quo, we need to think long-term, and we need to have an evidence-based approach to it. So I don't know if Jay wanted to elaborate a little bit more on that, maybe even just by turning on your microphone, or
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything you wanted to share.
No, I think you got that, Patrick. You beat me to it.
Okay.
thank you. Question on staff, how many new staff? And then a question, new location or current location. I believe that would be based on our office location with the service. So Patrick, do you want to comment on the staff in the office?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, first, we talked about consolidating. So there is a little bit of movement of staff from one service to another. We talked about how the existing functions from regional parks and regional planning will come into regional transportation service. So that consolidating piece will very much mean some movement of staff there. But those staff are existing, their costs are existing, and they will move into a new function without added cost. There will be one new manager to coordinate all of this envisioned right now. That is the only new staff we are envisioning for this service at the moment.
And then we would continue to operate out of the
existing location, no new space, existing office space, existing office supplies.
Okay, thanks. And then a question, will the regional transportation service also look to coordinate services with transit systems beyond the CRD? Example, the Cowichan Valley Regional District, Duncan to Victoria, transit that crosses the Malahat Drive is desperately needed for commuters, and the large population that lives north of the Malahat would like affordable access to our capital city.
Yeah, I mean, our regional transportation approach and our plan and our solutions have to think about it interregional travel as well. So service between functional service between the CVRD or Cowichan Valley and here is obviously delivered by BC Transit, the regional bus service. And we will work with them as well as with the Ministry of Transportation. The Ministry of Transportation actually has a strategy that's worth a look. It's called the South Island Transportation Strategy. You can Google it. It's on the Ministry of Transportation and Transit's website. It's a great summary plan. It identifies core regional and interregional projects that are going to improve travel. So there is already that strategy. So while our focus will predominantly be for the CRD, it will absolutely take consideration for how people get in and out of the CRD. And then that, I should say, also includes the airport and our ferry terminals and how those integrate with transit, with our active models. So we aim to weave all of those modes together.
Thank you. Another question. As an advocate for transit, rail, cycling for the past 30 years, I found that we are not far ahead in integrated transportation system than we were in the 90s. Do you feel that a more integrated voice from this region would allow more funding, for example, for an actual rapid transit system? Better transit would be beneficial because it seems that the mainland gets more funding attention. Do you feel that Transportation Authority would help? Touched a little bit on this in your answers, but maybe
yeah.
could.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. Like, that we are not particularly that much further ahead. This is a big reason why the CRD board identified transportation as a regional priority, and a big reason why they have directed staff to pursue this regional transportation service. If we don't do anything, we can't expect anything to change. So I do like going back to the Metro Vancouver example, and full caveat, I used to work in Metro for the city of Surrey for 15 years, so I do bring a broad perspective from that region as well. They've done this integrated transportation system planning for decades. I already shared that they obviously have many billions of dollars in investment. And you could play devil's advocate and say, well, they've got about 6 times, 7 times our population, but per capita, their investment is still way past CRD. So many times dollars past CRD. So in terms of the combined senior levels of government funding. So yeah, I would say based on those observations, you're much more likely to get senior funding. Now, with respect to the Transportation Authority, that's not on the table right now. That is a bigger question. The authority, the likes of TransLink, I suppose. I mean, observationally, TransLink is very effective in getting funding, but that's not. But the integrated planning happened way before TransLink. So the first SkyTrain as a concept was delivered by BC Transit. It wasn't delivered by TransLink. TransLink came later, but the integrated planning that was done by the region back then it was called Greater Vancouver Regional District. That was done in coordination with BC Transit through a service, not unlike what we're talking about right now, that predated TransLink. So I think the authority would help, but I don't think we're there yet. I think that's much further down the road.
Maybe just a comment in terms of attracting funding. We have heard from senior levels of government that we would be much more successful if we did speak with a unified voice rather than having individual local governments making asks at the same time, but actually prioritizing our projects and coming forward with an ask on a prioritized base for the region. We've been told we'd be much more successful. And then, you know, further to Patrick's comments on the authority, within our board's own authority, we can create a service. Creating an authority does require provincial legislative changes. And so the very first step for us to move the needle in transportation is the creation of this service. And then the board can look at other options going forward, but this would be sort of the first step to show that we are successful as a region with this service. Would this proposed regional transportation service support solutions like LRT? Oh, I think we've already asked that question. Question on given the drastic over budget deficit of municipal, provincial, and federal governments, how can you justify more debt, and who do you expect will pay these deficits and the interests incurred?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a big question. But first and foremost, I mean, we're all residents of this region. None of us want to pay more taxes. We're very aware of the current fiscal challenges that all municipalities in the region are facing, and that the CRD is facing. And we're going into this process, and we're going through this process with that at top of our mind. So that's why we're not proposing significant change right away. We're not proposing significant change until any change, I should say, until we create a very clear roadmap by way of the regional transportation plan. So that's why we've purposely chosen that should be the first step. That will create the value proposition to justify why there should be any spending. If we're not able to make a case through a clear, cohesive plan and vision with clear, cohesive programs and functions, then I don't think we should be getting more taxing anybody. We need to make a value proposition. That's our job number one. So we're going into this knowing that and having that as top of mind. And also just to remind that you know, in addition to creating that plan, the first step is not it is, I should say, about the consolidation of existing functions. So that's not going to generate new cost. That's taking existing functions, consolidating them into the new service, and those costs are being brought over and then removed from those other services. So it's a net. It's that consolidation piece is a net zero. I don't know, Kevin, if you wanted to elaborate anything more on that.
Patrick, I think you've I would make those exact same comments. This next question is, I've not heard anything so far that gives serious consideration to real transit solutions for the long term, such as LRT using existing already owned rights of way. And why is that? And I know, Patrick, you've talked about transit being the purview and authority decision maker on that is BC Transit. And you know, within our service, what we're trying to do is align and work more closely with transit than we do right now, and try to align our planning within our regional transportation plan to the work that BC Transit is doing on its future plan. Maybe, do you want to add anything further to that?
Well, yeah, I suppose so. You know, part of this process that we're about to undertake with this regional transportation plan is going to parallel BC Transit updating their long range forecasting and planning, and as part of that joint sort of process, we will be examining the most suitable long-term higher order transit routes. So LRT to the West Shore is very much something that we are thinking about. Similarly, you know, rapid bus or other higher forms of transit out to the airport and BC Ferries. There's already a plan for rapid bus to Mackenzie along Mackenzie to UVic. But we're creating a new plan. We're creating a new long-term vision for that 600,000. And we need to have that long-term lens. There might be more routes. The route out to Langford and Colwood for higher order transit, there's a number of different potential routes. So we do have an identified route already that the Blink follows. And that route is actually was developed through quite a lot of technical review by BC Transit and the Ministry of Transportation. In fact, it's in the South Island Transportation Strategy. If you want to go have a look at it, it speaks to long-term LRT along that corridor. There's actually an alignment there already. So is that the most appropriate route going forward? Can it also leverage portions of the existing ENN rail through that western portion of the CRD where there's already rail lines? Does the highway, the Trans-Canada Highway play a role in that? These are very good questions that will all play a big role in the long-term transportation future and plan for the region. And I think they definitely are on the table for consideration.
Thanks, Patrick. And next question relates to the answer on the trail widening and lighting. Thanks for the answer around the cost of the trail widening and the busyness of the trail. I heard it's 53 million for 6.5 kilometers of trail. Can you confirm this is all funded by taxpayers, whether they use the trail or not, versus roads that are supported by gas taxes, licensing fees, insurance costs? Are there any plans to charge active transportation fees, bike tolls, so there's more equity? You want to take that, Patrick?
Sure. Yeah. Yes, it's approximately $53 million. We have applied, and it's a grant process. So we apply for as many grants, as number of grants as possible. We've been successful for some of them. We have recently applied for a $30 million grant specifically for this project to the federal government through their active transportation fund. It's a very, very big fund, and I feel we made a very good case for funding. Even if we get a portion of that, that is grant funding that will offset any local costs associated with that trail. So that will help supplement that. So when we talk about the borrowing cost, every time we're successful with getting grant funding, it brings that regional borrowing cost down. With respect to other ways of funding these types of things, akin to gas taxes and licensing fees and so forth, I don't think we necessarily have thought for active transportation fees. I mean, our main objective here is to try and get as many cars off the road as possible, and also by supporting people who do choose to travel by car. And so, yes, $53 million feels like a lot. Are you aware, whoever asked this question, that just the Highway 17 Keating Cross overpass is $77 million? I've never gone on the Keating overpass. That's just one of many, many highway projects across British Columbia that we're all paying for. So we talked about approximately 4 million people using these trails annually. And this is a very significant project. We are doing everything we can to reduce that cost while making these trail systems have increased capacity for many, many more people for the next generation. So, and we will continue to do that. So I'm not sure if I answered that question, but I hope that just provided a bit of context.
I mean, your answer really was that we are all, it is all being funded through taxpayers on that project, and it is a priority project that the board has approved. But in addition to that, we are actively pursuing active transportation grants. So thank you for that clarification. Is the plan to prioritize walking and transit by expanding transit hours of availability to allow those who attend post-secondary education and or work outside of traditional hours, for example, the service industry and ferries, to have an option other than cars to get to work or school. For example, living in Saanich and working downtown or in Sydney for BC Ferries. If so, can this be a priority if, for example, it conflicts with the Saanich municipal priorities in their active transportation plan? So pretty fulsome question there. Speaks to transit hours. Maybe I'll let you work through it, Patrick, first.
Yeah, sure. What with the transit hours, as you know, and as we spoke to in this presentation, BC Transit and the bus services that we all see and participate in, or maybe we don't, but nonetheless, BC Transit and buses, buses are delivered by BC Transit, and those are through the jurisdiction of the Victoria Regional Transit Commission, which is a commission made up of, among others, elected officials, and that guides service expansion and service delivery. I know they have plans for service expansion. I believe they actually have some transit service expansion forthcoming in April. But that would really be something, I think, to look to the BC Transit website and further updates to understand more fully. With respect to, so that's about getting around via bus. How can it be a priority, for example, if it conflicts with Saanich municipal priorities in the active transportation plan? Well, I suppose just to reiterate that we need to work together more to overcome and address gaps and redundancies. We cannot plan a region by having 13 municipalities plan in silos, and they don't want to plan in silos. So when we create a cohesive long-term plan, it will very much look to the municipalities to guide what they're doing and then build off of that and integrate off of that. And of course, that will involve BC Transit as well.
Thank you, Patrick. If I understand correctly, the CRD is merging two services from two different departments, while for the most part keeping the same budget, though this may increase in future years. This to me sounds essentially like a departmental and service reorganization. Why does the CRD need an AAP process to do what seems to essentially be a very beneficial reorganization? Maybe I'll open with an answer to this one. And ultimately, under our current service authorities, under our regional planning function, we really are limited to that planning work, data collection, and analysis. The development of a transportation service really allows us to move beyond planning and into programming and implementation, and then really strengthening our role in our collaboration with the other agencies and stakeholders. And by working together with our municipalities and doing prioritized projects, we'll have a better success at getting grant funding for the region, and the ability to bring that additional grant funding to the table, or matching funding, would allow us to be successful there. And we can't currently do that under the existing functions that we have. I don't know, Patrick, if you wanted to add anything in addition to that.
Though I think you know, the question that was posed before of the maximum requisition, that's the sort of the capacity, right? So that's also a big part of why the AAP process is necessary. It's to just establish that capacity. Real important point that I don't think we've talked about today is that some of the regional services, including regional parks and including regional planning, were established through letters patent, have long-standing services, do not have the type of maximum requisition that we're talking about. So what we're actually talking about is pulling in existing functions from services that do not have that threshold and putting them into one that has a maximum threshold. But yes, what we are doing is a reorganization and a refocusing using existing functions into a new service. And the AAP process is more related to the bylaw and the establishment of that potential capacity to enable the service. But
And undertake functions that we currently
that we can't
can
do.
have
Yeah,
the authority to do. Yes.
that's right.
Thank you. If the CRD makes a regional transportation strategy, will the Ministry of Transportation need to keep making the South Vancouver Island transportation strategy? Will these be a duplication of efforts, or will the CRD take over this function from the Ministry of Transportation and Transit?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, the South Island Transportation Strategy of the Ministry of Transportation and Transit is just for their own jurisdiction. But it really is a look at long-term road, highway planning. So it's effectively a highway strategy. It identifies things that are now underway, like the Keating Overpass, the $78 million project that I referred to in Central Saanich. But it also identifies a bunch of other projects on the highways. Some of them, like the Colquist Bridge is being widened to enable bus on shoulder, and also the Trans-Canada is being widened in that section to enable bus on shoulder to make the bus service more efficient. So SITS with South Island Transportation Strategy is really their strategic plan. So like all the other municipalities as well that have their own municipal transportation plan, the regional transportation plan is, and the service is really about pulling all of those together to create a cohesive interjurisdictional, intermunicipal and sort of comprehensive plan. Pulls all of those functions together so that we can really look at like how transit and active transportation modes and cycling and walking, bus service, other potential types of services, ferries, airports, how that all comes together to create that cohesive plan. In some cases, it may reiterate projects, and that's a fine thing. The more times that we can reiterate key priority projects across multiple plans, the more evidence and sort of rationale we have to establish them, particularly if our plan, which is going to be as evidence-based as possible, so that when we make cases for funding, whether it's to the feds or the province, or we make a case to taxpayers for borrowing or anything like that, that it's really enshrined in a really comprehensive plan. Yeah, I think that answers the question.
Thank you. Question related to how many people are on this call, and then what is the threshold for the alternative approval process to fail, and how close has the CRD come to an AAP failing ever? In terms of the people on this call, we have 19 attendees right now. I have seen that throughout this presentation as high as mid-40s, I believe, in that 35 to 40 range, if I recall. So we have had some falling off. In terms of the threshold for this AAP to fail, there's approximately 33,200, the 332,000 representatives that are eligible to vote against this, should they wish to, and 10% of that would be 33,200. So in order for this AAP to fail, we would need to receive more than that threshold. And then how close has the CRD come to an AAP failing ever? I know of one that's failed and it was a local AAP within, I think it was Salt Spring Island. I'm not aware of another one that's failed within the CRD. And that could be a result of the one that failed is a very small population, and then it doesn't take a lot to get that to fail if there's a very small number of people that are living in that community. And then, are there any politicians available to answer questions? And we do have we do have representation from our transportation committee chair, as well as our chair of our board. I think what is the best way to let our elected representatives know how we feel about the service, the AAP, and the great question on how this seems more like a reorg than a new service. In terms of letting your elected representatives know, I believe that you can let your own elected representatives in your community know, but you could also reach out through our CRD board portal if you want to submit questions or your comments. But I think ultimately, you can also submit questions to staff if you want us to follow up with specific questions. I think we answered the question related to the reorg versus a new service, and ultimately we do not have the authorities currently to undertake what is being proposed under the new service. And so I think, yeah, anything further you want to add there, Patrick?
No, we're positioning ourselves for a new service. In order to do that, there does require some reorganization to take place, but we're also really cognizant that we want to be gradual about this. We want to be purposeful. We want to be thoughtful to costs and budgets. So that's why we're starting with a very gradual process, which is about reorganization, which does not carry net new costs for the reorganizational piece to it. So yeah, I would say that's a good synopsis. The board is made up of all of our elected officials, select of our elected officials across the region, and so they are also very aware of these matters. And of course, we were directed by the board to undertake this work.
I do not see any. Oh, what are the relative pros and cons of developing a transportation service? I've heard a lot of benefits: efficiency, less duplication of efforts, strategic governance, but are there any notable disadvantages, if any? Example, loss of governance, cost, loss of efficiency, etc. Patrick, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always perception of bureaucracy. I think that's the biggest challenge for local governments. Like, to be totally forthright, is we're often perceived as just being a layer of bureaucracy. And I can assure you, like, we're residents of this region. We have a very keen interest in this region, and we really want to benefit it. So we're doing our level best to approach this process with strong intent, with the desire to drive positive change in the region. If we don't do anything, we can't expect anything to change. If you're sort of quite pleased with the current transportation narrative in the region, you may not be supportive of this region. But I know there's a lot of people out there who are not particularly happy with congestion, who are not necessarily particularly happy with how we're moving forward with transportation in the region. And so our attempts are to sort of tackle that with a new service in a modest, gradual, and thoughtful manner.
Just give it a minute or two and see. We don't have any currently open questions for answering, but just give it a pause and see if any new ones come in. Not seeing any. If you want to advance the presentation to, oh, thank you guys. This was great. We appreciate that. Thank you for the comments, and hope you benefited from the question and answers that we shared with you today. So just in closing, we want to thank you for joining. Hope you learned about the proposed service, and for more information on the AAP process and who can participate and where you can find a response form, we've got the contact emails here on the screen. So there's an email at at crd.bc.ca, as well as a website, crd.ca/transportation-AAP. So I think we'll close it here. Thanks for all the participation.